Welcome to the Journos. I'm Peter Martin. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got Hugh McDonald, John McGarry and Alison McConnell with me today to discuss all the hot topics domestically and further afield. If you want to, you can hit the subscribe button on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel and come and join the football family. And there's a few good topics to get our teeth into today. Is it time to enforce a 5% or more allocation for the away support in the SPFL? Is fan behaviour getting better or worse than years gone by? We remember the great Sir Bobby Charlton, and we'll also look at the top 10 best Man United players we think ranked from 10 to 1. You might disagree with us. And over and above that, something that sent shivers down all three of the journos here today is quite simply 3 clubs in Scotland have had players nominated for a Ballon d'Or. Can you name them? And the panic has set in right across the board here on it. But I'm sure once we start to open up our mind, we'll get a clearer picture of who was nominated. So let's kick off with something that I think has reared its ugly head, certainly over the last few days. With Hearts playing against Celtic and only, I think, 576 fans allowed in, John, there was a fair bit of anger afterwards. First of all, the allocation, they were contesting it. Secondary to that, there wasn't a lot of Hearts fans in that end. They didn't fill it the way they said they were going to fill it. And I'm just wondering if we are slowly but surely following some clubs and some organisations in Europe and killing the possibility of football the way we know it.
Well, the thing is, the tradition of the away supporter is really strong in Britain and Scotland. I mean, if you go to many games in the continent, you don't see away fans there. You know, like in Spain, there's not a tradition of supporters going to away matches in the same way they do here. And they travel in incredible numbers. And it's something that I think has got to be looked at. You've got to always respect the concept of home advantage. Any club has got a right to kind of look after their own fans first. However, I think that's got to be balanced with something which means we're not going towards a situation whereby there's going to be virtually no away fans at games. We're trying to market the game. You know, having virtually no fans present isn't good. You know, I mean, I was at the most recent Glasgow derby and Edinburgh derby. There were no Celtic fans, as we know, at Ibrox for that game. For the Hearts-Hibs game at Tynecastle, they still had the whole end because of the reciprocal arrangement between the clubs. The atmosphere at the Edinburgh derby was far better. You know, I think these things have got to be looked after. And I think the 5% thing should be welcomed.
Yeah, is it a generational thing, Hugh, where some people will say, oh, you're just a bunch of old fuddy-duddies? Or is it a case of it needs to be looked at, it needs to be addressed? I mean, I suggested there 5% is what they're possibly looking at. I think it should be 10% for any ground that exceeds 30,000. Because there's no way you can suddenly put that big banner up the middle and then have stewards on, what, 50 quid a shift, try and keep 2,500 Celtic fans away from a good 4,000 Rangers fans on the left-hand side.
I think if you look at it, if you talk about old fuddy-duddies, I've got the trademark on that, I'm the template for that. And in the old days, of course, when you were travelling to games, there was no tickets. There may have been tickets for the Celtic Rangers game, but they were easily got, and it was huge, huge away support. I mean, Celtic at Ibrox and Rangers at Parkhead got one end, and these days one end was 20-odd thousand, more maybe. And there was a great tradition of jumping in the bus and going up to Aberdeen via Auchterarder, etc., etc. And I think it enhanced the game. I think if you look at the game on the telly on Sunday and you were trying to market the game to a sponsor and you'd had Tynecastle absolutely rocking with packed, whether it had been with Celtic or Rangers fans, there is no doubt that is not only a better atmosphere for the players and the viewers watching, but it's better for the game. There's no doubt about that. Having a game that if you talk to any businessman in the world and try to explain to them the rationale about turning away supporters for an industry that always talks about not having enough money, it's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no problem with people exercising their democratic right to completely dismiss my suggestion out of hand. I mean, I've had so many people come on our social media and across the comment section on our YouTube channel saying, oh, wait a minute, shut up. The Real Madrid fans only get, 300-400 to go at the Nou Camp, same back at the Bernabeu. And I'm saying, well, who cares? Why use any other country as a template?
It's a different culture entirely.
Exactly.
There's never been a culture of fans travelling. No, I think you lose so much from it. Apart from anything else, there's a pantomime element, I think, from it that I think supporters miss out on it too. I think it's way to the detriment of the game when you don't have a bit of balance in the ground, and I think atmospheres suffer for it. I've said this before on this show and to you, that I remember doing a piece with Henrik Larsson, and we were talking about all the derbies he'd played in and what they meant and why was it Glasgow derby, what made it so spectacular, and he's saying, well, that very thing, people don't travel between the Barcelona Real Madrid game. The culture in Glasgow was so different. It was incomparable. I think you risk diluting it. I think you risk detracting from that completely. And I think key and fundamental to it all, we've just lost a sponsor for this league. Is it has to be an attractive proposition for people to come into it. You need the colour, you need the noise. I think there's no sense in not having that element of balance.
And see this thing about that Barcelona only get 300 and Real Madrid get 300. It's a nonsense because the ground's sold out.
Yeah.
It's sold out.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're not losing a penny over this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the point here is Stuart Robertson came out as the managing director of Rangers. Now, I'm not in any way, and this is where you have to tread carefully on this. It's my opinion, if people look back, and when they draw a line in the sand over the lunacy of this and what killed the Celtic Rangers game, but who started? There's a great culture in Scotland. Who started it? Well, for me, it was Hearts and Hibs, because Leanne Dempster decided we don't need the Hearts fans there. We're going to give them a smaller allocation, and that point in the sand is when Rangers jumped on the bandwagon and said, well, we're going to do that because we've got fans absolutely battering down our door saying we want change, we don't want them there. So you're in a situation then where, tit for tat, John, Celtic just go, well, if we're not getting 7,000, you're not getting 7,000.
Yeah, there is one counter-argument to this. It's St Mirren are the counter-argument. It's fascinating what's happened there, because obviously for long enough they gave up both ends of their grounds when Celtic Rangers came to town, and eventually thought, we're not going to do that. We'll take a bit of a risk here, we'll give them one end, and we'll see if we can encourage more of our own supporters to come out, and they have. And what's happened is their home form has improved, they're higher up the league, so they're now making more money, and it's offset anything they might have lost. And I don't think there's much in their attendances now. However, there's still one end of the ground, which is visiting fans.
Yes.
That's the point. So it still creates a good atmosphere.
You still have access. It's not that it's been completely eliminated. There's fewer fans in, but you still have access.
But what's the argument
point
then?
on Sunday though was that you could see empty seats at Tynecastle.
Yeah.
That you think it's insane. You've actually knocked back money. You've lost money on this game. That, for me, from a purely marketing point of view, makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, remember, you can flip it any way you want to strengthen the case, and your argument is, for St Mirren, we've got three sides, and we've given them one side, and that's the allocation they get. So there's a financial one. There's a risk where businessmen, Livingston say you can have all three sides, because we're lucky if we get, an end full anyway of Livingston fans, so you totally get that. Is the argument on tradition, finance, changing the spectacle of the game? Because all these things come into play in what we're eventually faced with. If I look at the English Premier League, away fans in the English Premier League normally get access to 3,000 tickets per game, or 10% of the stadium capacity if it's a stadium that's bigger than 30,000 seats. So that's their rule. 15% of away fans get tickets if it's an FA Cup tie before the semi-final. UEFA has a situation where they have 5% allocation for away support. You can understand 5% is not bad, because not that many people are as mad as Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen and Hearts and Hibs who want to take the Waynes and everybody with them. So we are a fanatical support. The flip side of that is Tottenham are in one area of Arsenal. I know their away section, and that away section has Arsenal fans in the tier above them. But unfortunately, we can't do that, John.
Yeah, I think those rules to me are a balance. I mean, it's overall talking about home advantage, and that's a key fundamental in football. But you can't just do that to the detriment of the sport. And you identified there, Peter. It's everything. It's fan experience. It's marketing. It's money in terms of TV deals. Nobody will be able to convince me that if we continue on this road, which is going to be, eventually the point is going to be there's virtually no fans in stadiums, that's good for the game. It's not. Now it might in a short-term thing satisfy some, Rangers supporters who maybe have got a seat at the expense of Celtic fans or vice versa. But in a general sense, it's a bad thing, I think.
The other thing about it, Hugh, and this is the worry about it. One, you've got an 11-1 vote, which is just it's just gross stupidity in our country. But when they eventually vote on it, they're looking now at 5%. And I'm saying to myself, well, why are you looking at 5%? Why don't you make it 10% and do what the SFA do? Obviously, there was a bit of consternation when the Scottish women were not happy with the way the whole allocation was kicking in. But I think that disappointingly, the women get the wrong end of the stick on this. Yeah. Basically, what you do is, there's your block, there's your allocation. We'll sell that block. If you can't sell them, that block doesn't get released to you. Yeah. Then the next block, then the next block. And then basically, you've got that separation where you say, but Celtic and Rangers, they will sell 7,000 tickets. I mean, you struggle to get it in away support because it's a sellout. And as you say, John, I like that point, is it's a spectacle. It was once one of the greatest derbies in the world, not for technical football, but for the sheer, call it poison at times, but the atmosphere, the spectacle of it, the history of it as well. That's now no longer the case. And I think
a very unique selling point.
Yeah, history will look back, Alison, and say, you guys, with your primitive, backward thinking, pandered to a group of people who didn't think about the bigger picture here.
Yeah, and I think there's a case now of who wants to blink first. I think you have an element where nobody wants to back down, or no one wants to be seen to be the weaker by saying, OK, for example, if Celtic were to say, right, the 30th of December, we're going to open this up, you can have 5,000 Rangers fans in, you would have Celtic fans up in arms about it. One, because they've paid for a season ticket now that gives them access to those games. And two, they'll say, well, we never had fans in at Ibrox, so why are we now accommodating? Someone's going to have to come. So the best you can hope for is that maybe from next season going forward, but I don't see it. I don't see that anyone's prepared to concede any ground now.
I agree with that. I think that it's so entrenched now that the only thing that could be is if it was imposed upon them, and there's nobody to do the imposition.
It's impossible to do it because of the way that they vote.
The thing is, in the Edinburgh derby, it's a reciprocal arrangement. It's nothing, it's, I mean, the line that Rangers try to sell, that with season ticket holders queuing round the corner, so therefore we've got to look after them first. The season ticket holders queued round the corner in 1986. Celtic still got the Broomlow Road end then.
Yes.
So the reciprocal arrangement still existed back then, and it should do now. I mean, if it was 5%, if that did get voted through, you're still looking at 2,500 Celtic fans. It's better than having none, and it's obviously more than 800.
But it's not good in the Broomlow Road end, John.
No, that's nowhere near it. I mean,
it actually becomes harder, I think.
It's more difficult to police it.
Yeah. To me, it should be 8,000. For the Glasgow derby, I agree with you. I don't see it being resolved anytime soon. But if they could get back to the old reciprocal arrangement, which benefited the game in general, I think it would be the better for it.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you speak to supporters too. I've spoken to a lot of supporters who at first were saying, no, it's better this way. No, you get your seat and everybody gets in. I've sensed a change through speaking to people saying, no, it definitely misses something.
It's a nonsense. To actually get to a situation where it's all Celtic or all Rangers fans is a nonsense. And, some people say it gives them an advantage. It doesn't give you an advantage if you get a rotten team. Yeah. It doesn't matter. You can't play football. 50,000 can't come on the park and suddenly take a corner.
And if you sometimes that can be a horrible place to play. And if you're not playing well, if you're at Ibrox not playing well, the toxicity in the back of that Celtic win at the end of August, start of September, was incredible. I mean, it's not like anything I've ever known. You think when you've got a full stadium and you're not playing well and everyone in your back.
John, the best situation, and I think this is where the away fans really get the feel for it, is if you've got a game where, we're lucky, we're in the press box, you see, if there's 7,000 Rangers or Celtic fans in the away support and they score, the noise is just unbelievable. The celebration. I can still remember Neil McCann rounding the goalkeeper, firing the ball into the back of the net, looking that way and thinking, oh, by the way, they're over there, I'll run round the back end. And then I remember Barry Ferguson saying to me, yeah, I scored a belter. And he says, I was running towards the Celtic fans, and I thought, I'm not really that brave. I'll run this way. But the joy of it all, I mean, I can remember Derek, who I worked with for many, many years, and Derek was a great noise up. I mean, he was fantastic. I mean, he actually scored in the Rangers end, but ran to the jungle and just basically did this gesture to all the Celtic fans just to noise them up. And I thought to myself, God yourself, Derek, because I'm not saying you're looking to somebody to gesticulate or indeed incite a riot, but you can have a bit of fun. But today, my God, it looks as if it's been eradicated.
The point Alison makes is a very good one. At the most recent Rangers Celtic game at Ibrox, you would normally have thought that having exclusively 50,000 Rangers fans would be totally to the benefit of the home team. It wasn't that day because they were under so much pressure. And after Celtic scored, had there been 8,000 Celtic fans in the ground, there would still have been that element of, we'll still back our team.
The defiance element,
but they turned on their team quicker because there were no rival fans in the stadium.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It worked against Rangers that day, and I wonder if they've worked that out yet.
Yeah, it's a fairly contentious issue. You might want to have your point of view on it. You can in the comments section below and across all our social media. And if you download the PLZ Soccer app, you can also comment in the contact section of the app. And again, fans really at the forefront of our discussions, because although we love to see away fans in, we certainly don't like to see disgusting behaviour. And I wonder, Hugh, is it getting worse now? Is it worse than when it was when you were maybe watching it as a kid, or
Is it worse? No way is it worse. Some of the stuff that's daubed on seats, as we saw, some of the songs, are deeply disturbing and deeply just
offensive.
Offensive, yeah, that's a good one. Just team up to everybody, and I always think so that always existed, those offensive songs. I mean, if you go back to the days, and I used to have chats with the late great Walter Smith about this, about the songs that when we were getting brought up and on the terrace and were singing were appalling.
Yeah,
absolutely appalling. But the actual thing, the safety in the grounds and on the way to the grounds was much worse than anything you'll ever see today. I mean, it was. I mean, I was saying earlier, I was in Argentina for for games like the Bombonera, and that air of menace that goes about it. And it reminded me of going to the games in the 60s and 70s in Scotland. There was an air of menace about it. There was, there was fights breaking out, there was fights in terraces. The bottle throwing, Peter, was, extraordinary, the level of bottle throwing.
In that game?
No, in any game.
Yeah.
In Scotland.
In Scotland, yeah.
I mean, there's bottle throwing at the Bombonera as well, but I mean, you could be standing at the game and taken to hospital because somebody had thrown a ball. People forget how bad it was in the bad old days.
Yeah.
And you don't have that now.
Yeah, I can remember actually, and I hope I've got the team right, but I can remember a Scottish Cup tie, I think it was against Stirling Albion. Jock Stein left the dugout and went up
it was Anfield,
went up into the section and said to the Celtic fans to stop singing IRA songs. I think he'd had enough of it. When I spotted the phone being held up with the Hibs fan mocking, Rangers losing 66 people at the Ibrox disaster, you ask yourself, John, okay, what punishment fits the crime? But you have to look at the root of it and say, what, first of all, gets a person to think that is acceptable behaviour? And I don't know. It's, society, parenting, a mixture of all, a lack of education and understanding of the pain that you would cause someone. All of it was running through my mind, thinking, Aberdeen fans equally guilty of it. Celtic fans singing about the death of Davy Cooper and Walter Smith and Jimmy Bell, equally disgusting. I mean, Manchester City had to apologise for some of their fans in the conduct and the death of Sir Bobby Charlton. Yeah. And then, of course, we only have to look at what goes on with people actually singing about the death of 98, 99 people in Hillsborough. I mean, it's just it just beggars belief.
Yeah, I think in terms of safety, going to a football match, there's no question that it's a far safer experience these days than it would have been in the 1970s. There's no doubt about that. There's just the no alcohol or better policing. Obviously all see to stay. There is no question of that. Notwithstanding that, I think over the last 10 years, in terms of just kind of vile behaviour, unacceptable behaviour that you've just sort of mentioned there, I think it has probably got a bit worse. And there's you do wonder. I think the internet's got a lot to do with it as well. I think people just kind of don't think there's any consequences for their actions these days. And they can get away with more kind of sort of snidey stuff. They don't have to throw bottles, but they can make their mark in other ways, if you like. But yeah, I think that's sort of okay. It's not physically hurting people, but it's still entirely unacceptable. And there have been maybe a couple of years ago there was a bit of a number of kind of missile throwing incidents at Scottish grounds as well. There was a lot, and they thought maybe this is on the rise again. Thankfully, it seemed to kind of die away a wee bit.
You still get pyrotechnics.
You do indeed. But I mean, just because things are better than they were 30, 40 years ago, isn't to say that we should be satisfied with the way they are at the moment.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting. I think what you've seen across the last decade, and the Green Brigade would maybe be a case in point, is that you have a collection of ultras amongst every kind of support. That you have a hardcore element who are going everywhere. I would say, from my own observations, it tends to be groups of fairly young men, late teens, early 20s. Obviously, a culture of drinking on the way to the game. I would think about a drug taking as well. It's almost a recreational thing that you go and support your team, but there's a sideshow that goes with it. And I think when you're caught up in that kind of environment of a culture of togetherness, or of that, sometimes they feed off one another in terms of a bit of antisocial behaviour. That there's an element when there's a collective like that. I think it can be quite hard to police it, and I think over recent years you've seen the standoff going on just now between the police filming sections of the sport and then the support filming back, and I think that Celtic fans call it the pig watch.
Yeah.
I think stuff like that leaves a sour taste. How you address it, I think, is very difficult, because I think clubs have almost created these hardcore elements. Where you take it on from now, it's tough, because you can't break it up. Motherwell have it. You've seen missiles coming, things thrown from that corner of the ground.
Yeah, there was a corner at Easter Road where Rangers were playing.
That's right, and was it Ryan Jack or Ryan Kent was the boy came on one of the midweek games.
Neil Lennon, Tynecastle. The guy vaults the advertising board and comes straight towards him. Another situation like that. The one thing I would like to quickly qualify in this whole discussion is that we are discussing basically a minority of fans. They don't represent the club. They certainly don't represent the majority of fans who go to games to watch the game, enjoy it with their family, some enjoy it with their mates. I mean, that's the difficulty is sometimes, because you are criticising or condemning the behaviour of certain fans, certain clubs, and it's gone on across the whole of Scottish football, and some fans, I'm not saying every club has bad fans, but it's certainly a minority that continually tarnish the club's name.
I'm not saying it's exclusively the ultras, but if you ask yourself the question, if the ultras were in the grounds, would there be less instances of this kind of behaviour? And I think the answer to that's pretty clear. I'm not saying it could happen. You could have people behaving badly, antisocially at other parts of the stadium, but I think there's probably less prevalence of it, you know.
Yeah.
I think there's a collective culture when you're part of something like that. I think individually, if you two sit down, you see even the internet, like it's almost this in microcosm. So someone might say something horrendous to you on Twitter, as all of us here will have been on the end of. If you sat next to them, they wouldn't dream of it. They wouldn't dream. They wouldn't have the same kind of freedom or license of expression to be so abusive or derogatory. And I think there's a collective when you're in that kind of culture.
And I think as well, it's that every fan, right? Every fan, whether you're young or old, they will revel in taunting the opposition, right?
Yeah.
That's part of fan culture. You sing, you know, going down, or whatever. There's all these things. I always remember it. Still in Albion when I was there as a season ticket holder, they made up of Bank fans. This was obviously a huge game, but no problems with 5% in the stands that day. But the Maid of Bank fans started shouting at us, going down, and we started singing, so are we, so are we. So. There is that element of taunting, and it's where you draw the line. And what has happened, I call it little boy behaviour, because it's all boys. Anytime you see this, what I would call boys, it's all young men. You very, very rarely see a woman involved in this.
Yeah.
And it's a very sort of macho young man thing that they want to say, you're taunting to level 6. This is how hard I am. I'm going hardcore.
Yeah.
I'm turning the dial to 11.
Yeah.
Because these guys surely don't believe this stuff that they're scrolling on seats or chanting is in any way appropriate or tolerable. Surely.
Yeah, well done for getting the Spinal Tap reference in. That's fantastic. Oh, I like you for that. That's absolutely top drawer. Okay, just briefly on it then, the solutions. I have 3 here. Obviously, I'm an ambassador for Show Racism, the red card. So one of the elements I think should be for anyone found guilty, especially the person who has just recently been found guilty from the Hibs perspective, is that fan should go through an education programme. Obviously, there's a lifetime ban, full march to Hibs for doing that. Secondary to that, should we name and shame them?
Well, if they appear in a court of law, which if they've broken the law, then they should do. Then well, that's the kind of that's the way it goes, isn't it? So I think that's just part of the territory.
Yeah, Ali, you buying into that?
Yeah, I think there's a bigger conversation to be had about the culture of our society, where particularly young men, feel as though they're placed just now. I think, you see girls outperforming boys academically all the time just now. I think when you look at the influence of people like Andrew Tate, the kind of nefarious influence of guys like this, and you think, what's going on? Why are our young boys and young men attracted to this kind of behaviour? What do we do to change it? What do you do to say, can we have a bit of self-reflection and can you stop? And I think sometimes that's a better solution than a punishment that almost gets your back up, you become defensive. I think what you want is some introspection. I think there's a question then about how you do that.
Yeah, well done to you for just putting us on a downer with the marking system at schools at the moment, Ali. I knew you'd get it in. That's worse than the Meadowbank chant, isn't it? Well done, Ali. Okay, there was a great player who sadly passed away in Sir Bobby Charlton. And I think for those of a certain vintage who were lucky enough to see him play at his absolute peak, he was a very special player. And please don't be offended by the fact I'm looking towards you first of all to offer it, Hugh, but from our point of view, black and white or even colour pictures of Bobby Charlton, I'm thinking to myself, you couldn't buy him for less than 150 million today.
Oh yeah, but he was more than that as well. I mean, this much overused word icon, he was actually a sort of template for a certain type of Englishman as well. He obviously very working class backgrounds, but very sort of dignified, and yeah, he got booked against Argentina, I think the '66 World Cup, and that was about it. I was asked to write a piece about him this week for the Mail, Peter, and immediately it was about how they wanted me on to, Sir Bobby in Scotland, and I went down to Manchester and interviewed him once, which was one of the great days of my life, not just my working life, my life, going for a man of my age, going into Bobby Charlton's office and interviewing him. And the interview finishing, Peter, shaking the hand of your interview subject in the shadow of his own statue. You don't do that often, do you?
No, absolutely not.
You don't do that often. And he was quite terse with me to begin with. He said, remember, you're only at 20 minutes here. And I said, yeah, and on that note, so well, I'll tell you what I'm going to ask you. I'm not going to ask you anything about your Manchester United career, World Cup or Munich. And his face relaxed. So what are you going to ask me about? I said, I'm only just going to ask you about Scotland. You know, what Scotland means to you. An hour later, we're still chatting. The people were knocking at his door. Sir Bobby, somebody's waiting for you here. He just went on and on about Scotland, because you've got to remember the Matt Busby connection, Paddy Crerand, Dennis, Fergie eventually as well. He used to go to the Scottish Cup final instead of the English final when he was a kid, because it was nearer. Hampden was nearer than Wembley. You forget these things. He scored his debut goal at Hampden. It was just story after story after story. Just an absolute gem of a man telling the story, very quiet. And I've got one wee story. I'll finish with I'm raving on about him, but it was such a great day. I always remember he used to talk great about Bobby Lennox. I always liked Bobby Lennox because he played for Celtic in a testimonial match with Lennox up front. And Lennox had played as a striker that day. And he was just unplayable, you know, Bobby Charton threading balls through to him, Lennox's speed. And I said, what about Bobby Lennox? He said, Bobby Lennox was the best centre forward I ever played with. And I said, Sir Bobby, you played with a centre forward that scored a hat-trick in a World Cup final. And he burst out laughing. He said, Bobby Lennox was the best Scottish centre forward. I said, Sir Bobby, you played with Dennis Law. I went, Bobby Lennox was a great player. So that, it was just, but it's impossible, I think, now for people to realise what Bobby Charton would have meant to our generation, in that we're talking about chants now, and we're talking about boos and things like that. And the Scotland-England game was a hugely febrile atmosphere. Wembley was packed with Scots fans, as you know. I can never remember Charlton being booed, or even like derogatory chant towards him at the end. There was just a feeling that kind of, well, this is a player. This is a player.
And the funny thing about it, you know, I love the makeup of different people with their personalities. You know what I'm like, John, I love a noise up. But I equally is looking up. I don't even need to tell him. I love a noise up. But I do love players who are so good that they project humility in abundance. And that's, I mean, he reminded me, you know, of many, many great players who didn't want to brag. Yeah. You know, it was just, that was part of his makeup.
When you look at the scoring record, I mean, it was approximately 1 goal and 3 for a midfielder throughout his career, you know, at club and international level, extraordinary. And I've obviously not seen all of his goals, and I'm sure he scored a few tap-ins, but how many of his goals were just absolute missiles, you know? If there was a cleaner striker of a football, I'm not sure I've seen him, you know, just like, and you look at the pitches back in those days, and the kind of the balls themselves, you know, and you know, extraordinary, you know, scorer of great goals, you know, as well as a prolific goal scorer as well. But I mean, do you think would it be stretching things? I was just thinking the whole kind of history of Man United. You know, I'm trying to think. Apart from Matt Busby and Alex Ferguson, I think there's an argument to say Bobby Charlton is, you know, perhaps the third most influential figure in the kind of history of the club, given his playing career, given the fact he was a director from '84 onwards, and was obviously played for Busby, but was a confidant of Sir Alec as well. I mean, his influence over the years, you know, go way back to the Munich air crash and all that. It's just, it's almost impossible to quantify.
Exactly. This is a guy, when you quantify his career, as a guy who at 11 was getting headhunted by all the top teams in England. They went to Manchester United, who weren't by any manner of means a top team in the 50s, and went there. And then he lives his life. He gets catapulted out an aeroplane in his seat for 40 yards and wakes up sitting in his airplane seat in the middle of a ice-strewn runway with the bodies of his greatest mates strewn about him. Comes back from that, 3 months later, makes his debut against Scotland, scores from 30 yards. And then through his life, he wins everything. He wins the Ballon d'Or, he wins a World Cup, he wins a European Cup, he wins a league, he wins an FA Cup. There is nothing that can be ticked off it. And all the time, Peter, can you imagine what we would be saying now? In those times, it was just, you were in a plane crash, go on with it.
The trauma.
Can you imagine, you know, and probably the untreated trauma that guy suffered from 1958, 57, 58, till he died.
Well, this epitomises the humility of the man, Alison, because if you watch countless interviews, he is at that on the edge talking about Munich because he feels, you know, why me? Why was I allowed to live?
I think it's a very natural reaction. I think if you did survive something like that, I think it's a very powerful and pervasive. I'm not sure you would ever lose that. I don't know if maybe it for some people it might be a driver. You know, I'm here and I feel as though I've got a great responsibility to live my life and to do everything to the fullest of my potential because I came so close to death and I've seen the fragility of life. I don't know. I've never been in that situation. I can only surmise. But I think now, with the education that even the likes of you and I would have of these kind of circumstances, it just didn't exist. Back then, the sort of post-traumatic shock that he would have suffered.
He was playing.
You wouldn't.
He was out of hospital and playing.
A month later.
Incredible.
For England,
but the one thing I had never truly appreciated the fallout between Bobby and Jack. I hadn't realised just how bitter it was and how long it had lasted, which I think would be one of your real. I think that's the one thing that you would say would be regrettable about his life.
We could do a whole programme on families falling out. But he was a wonderful player, and again, if you get a chance, and I offer this to the younger generation to go on YouTube, put in Bobby Charlton, because if you listen to the commentary, I always think it's great because he hits one with his left, and then you'll hear another commentator going, "Oh my, it's coming to his right foot," and you're thinking, what foot did he hit with? Because every one of them from either foot was a screamer.
It's almost a fairy tale story, but a really dark fairy tale too, because there is that stuff about Jack. There is Munich. There's also the turmoil when he was playing at Manchester United with players in the dressing room. There wasn't a team that really got on that well together because all stars, etc., etc. Fallout with Best, for example. And the one really interesting thing about it, probably his most important goal, all these screamers, he scored with his head. Right, it was the first goal against Benfica in the European Cup final, which was such a grail for Busby and the Manchester United team, and he scored with a header. And I watched Charlton. I was brought up. I'm heading rapidly towards 70, but I was trying to think, can I ever remember him scoring another? He probably obviously has scored another goal with his head. That's the only header that I can remember him scoring, and it was the goal that opened the scoring against Benfica.
Yeah, I think there might have been one against Scotland. As well. I watched them specifically the other day there, and you're right, it absolutely is rare. But one thing you can say is he certainly has his place among the Man United greats. Just where is open to the debate, John, as we go into the bit where you three start to really think, why does he always have to research this stuff? But I don't know about you, John, but I love a pint of beer, top 5, top 10.
Absolutely.
You know, so I'm going to offer you them, and then you can debate the positions. But Charlton, obviously number 1, best Ballon d'Or in '68, of course, fifth in the Player of the Century. And of course, his part to play in that European Cup. Giggs' titles that he's won and the cups that he's got, incredible. Cantona, 4 titles, 5 seasons, but his impact in really helping United to finally win that title. Ronaldo, not there for 2 long periods, in the first time and second time, but enough to leave a huge impact on Manchester United. Roy Keane, if I have one wish in life, is that those two would repair their bitter feud, Keane and Sir Alex Ferguson. I think it's a great shame. Whether it will ever, before one of them sadly passes away, I'm not so sure. My favourite player, in that team, Paul Scholes. Dennis Law, Duncan Edwards is in that list of the 10, Hugh, which I know you'll be able to argue with strongly, and in favour of, maybe, if I'm looking at your face and picking up the vibe on it, and Peter Schmeichel. So there's 10. Have I got anybody that I've missed that you think there's a good argument?
No, but I am glad you missed out David Beckham, because I know a lot of people would have him in there.
Right. Well, it's a good point you make, John, because I think David Beckham's world class.
Right.
At one point in his life, he was world class. Now, the unfortunate thing about him, and I don't want it to turn into a Beckham show, is it's a great argument for when does celebrity far exceed what you're doing on the pitch, and I think it's doing him a great disservice.
I'm going to take a little step back here, because I think David Beckham was marginally overrated as a footballer.
Right.
There was a great Brian Clough quote where he said, he was asked about Beckham when Beckham was kind of coming through, and he said, he can't head it, he can't tackle, and his wife can't sing. Yeah, listen, Beckham was an exceptional player. You know, listen, AC Milan, Real Madrid, PSG, Man United, they can't all be wrong. Scored some, great, his goal for England against Greece, iconic moment, so no doubt about it. But yeah, I would not have David Beckham in my all-time Man United top 10 like you.
Right.
I think I might have had Best before Charlton. I might have went with George Best as number one.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just on sheer ability.
Sheer ability. He's just a complete maverick. Just.
Well, I would have Best at the top, and I would. But Bobby Charlton would have had Duncan Edwards as number one, and anybody that would have watched him would have had Duncan Edwards as number one. But it's very difficult for us to judge because there's not much footage about him, and he was 21 when he died.
I read up a lot on him, Hugh, and the one recurring theme on him was legs like tree trunks, way ahead of his time, could pick a pass, strong as an ox.
Play him anywhere as well. He looked like a 25-year-old junior centre half, right? And he was a 17-year-old wing forward, as they were in these days. But you could put him up front. I remember an English under-17 team came to Sheffield and they were struggling against a Scotland under-17 team, and they just took him from midfield and played him centre forward and he scored a hat-trick. I mean, he was that good. He was playing for England, the England team. This was the England team of your, just not long after the year of Stanley Matthews' ability. I mean, you had to fight your way into the England team. People are getting debuts at 24, 25. He was in the England team at 17. It was just, it was unprecedented. It was just extraordinary. The other guy I would have in the 10 would be Wayne Rooney.
Wayne Rooney was the one I was just about to say. I think Wayne Rooney's really underrated at times.
I think Wayne Rooney is one of the most underrated players about, given his thing, because he was, I think the problem with Rooney was when people come into a first team, they're 6 or 7, right, and you're getting markings. And then they improving people, so he's really come on, he's a 9 or 10. Like Ronaldo, because Ronaldo wasn't great when he came into the United first team. But Rooney was a 10 when he came into the first team. He was, at 16 years of age, he was chipping seamen from 30 yards for Everton. So he always was at that. And if you look at his scoring record for Manchester United, it's astonishing.
Yeah. Who's he? Don't let me away with that, Ali. Who's out?
Schmeichel.
Schmeichel? Yeah.
I'm not having a goalkeeper in the top 10.
Could you make a case for Brian Robson?
I thought there might have been a case for Brian Robson.
Obviously, he was slightly unfortunate in the sense that Man United were
in terms of influence, as well. In terms of,
and he was obviously his injuries were well renowned, But my word, he was a ferocious talent. He was.
It's a good point, John, because I think there are certain players that sometimes get lost in the mediocrity of a generation, and they stand out, and because they haven't reached the pinnacles that you think they deserve, then you think. I mean, you look at Cooper. It's a classic example. Davy Cooper in a great Rangers side. We'd be talking about him every day. There'd be, people lauding what he could do, but he was for a long period in a mediocre Rangers side. And Paul McStay is a classic example as well. So we're debating it. I'm glad you pointed out that Beckham is such a great argument. Some people get fooled by the celebrity of him, but it's also a great debate. Cantona, the guy's releasing pop singles now. He could do it. He could do anything. Yeah, playing. Yeah, absolutely. I love him.
Cantona was astonishing. You're right, Peter. Cantona was a guy who got United over the line. And see, after that, once they'd climbed the mountain once, they were climbing it. I was looking the other day there at Ferguson's managerial record in the Premier League for about 15, 16 seasons, and it was astonishing. 1-1, 1-2, 3, 1-1, 2, 1-1, 2, 4, 3, 1-1. Just staying at the top all the time.
If I could throw in the last point here, and I know some people absolutely forget all about it. If you're putting, and time will go on with this one and debate it between, you've mentioned Rooney and he should be higher up or definitely in the top 10. Of all the players that I've mentioned there, I think if you're talking best in Charlton and 1 and 2, Giggs is definitely 3. Giggs, if you're talking about a man who was a phenomenon, Giggs was in the side.
In front of law.
Giggs,
A Ballon d'Or winner.
Giggs was in the side from an early age, and people were raving about him in the youth side, saying, there's a boy coming through here who is outrageous. He scored the greatest FA Cup goal of all time. If you look back at the titles he was involved in, if you look at his contribution, I think as time goes on, I think people now are scared at the moment to talk about Ryan Giggs because of his behaviour off the field. I think his place in Manchester United history has been slightly tainted by that. If the celebrity of David Beckham goes against him, the infamy of Ryan Giggs is choking a lot of people's, gratification and celebration of what he contributed. This boy had done it from the earliest age. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
I'm not having him above Dennis Law or Cantona.
No.
Would you have him above Roy Keane?
No.
No.
I think
he deserves a place in the top 10.
Yeah, he's, for what he won, he's extraordinary,
and the longevity.
But
you're not having his contribution as a player.
Yeah, absolutely am. Yeah. I think
he was a terrific
It's
player.
a great argument, isn't it?
It's a great, I mean,
you've got to separate it.
He was not only he was a huge player for so long, and then he was a clever player because he was an out-and-out winger, was what his trade was. But when that diminished a wee bit, he was good enough to play central midfield for Manchester United. And if you're playing central midfield for Manchester United, you're a good central midfielder. No, Fergie's no handing out shirts just to say you've done as well over the years, Giggsy. If you're playing there, you're playing for a reason.
Yeah.
So he's a
But see, of all the players that we've mentioned,
it's just a pub argument, isn't it?
It's a great pub argument, but of all the players we've mentioned, every one of you has alluded to technical genius, right?
Guys.
Every one of you has talked about, he was part of a side. It was unbelievable, and he got them over the line. You're talking about he's a maverick. You've talked about that with George Best. We're talking about longevity for the greatest ever manager in British football. He's in 13 times in that title-winning side. He's there. He's the man.
Yeah.
And I think people now at this moment are treading on eggshells with him because of what's gone on off the field.
The guys can, and girls watching it can check in this in Wikipedia, but I think there's a stat where if Giggs was a football club rather than a player, if he was just an individual football club, he'd be the third most successful football club in England.
And that sums it up. Regardless of the
in
titles.
150 years of English football, he would be the third most successful football club.
But regardless of the titles, Hugh, I would ask you this. Think about him as a footballer.
Oh, it's beautiful football.
I mean, it's a great argument, isn't it, John?
Yeah, it's sensational. You can't. You've got to separate it because let's be honest. That's what we're debating. What they produced the field of play in the honours they won, and Ryan Giggs is. Nobody's won more than football.
Yeah. Okay, just before we finish, and it started off a bit tentatively on the issues that we were discussing, but I think it's always good to finish off with something that makes us all feel, let's go out for a pint afterwards and continue this argument.
Except for me, obviously.
Without fighting. There's a pint of orange juice on you, calm your jets. But anyway, the other thing I was going to say, John, I know maybe in previous phone calls you've said, why are we having Hugh on the Journalist show? And the reason is because of all the topics, he's managed to go through them all. I mean, because he's been there and everyone... Tell John what William Wallace was like just before the battle at Stirling.
William Wallace. The great thing, there's a great story about William Wallace. Who was it came up? Murdo McLeod's debut was when he came on for William Wallace. William Wallace was playing for Dumbarton. and Murdo came on from that. As Murdo
You see, that, I mean, that's 1.2 seconds and he's given us a link to it. That's absolutely fantastic. The great Willie Wallace. Brilliant story, Hugh. Well done. I'm not sure you're going to do too well in the next part because before we finish, there are 3 Scottish clubs
right
that have contained players who've been nominated for the Ballon d'Or. And I know it's one of those issues where people say, oh, he should have won this one, from foreign shores. But even to get nominated when you're playing for a club in Scotland is phenomenal. Whether you finish 12th, 3rd, 2nd, or way back in the voting, because as John mentioned here, a lot of players get nominated, but even to be nominated is recognition for what you've achieved in your individual league. And of course, we also have, and we have to take it on the chin, that constant, derogatory statement that we do not have a league that is at a level that some of the other players are performing at. So, with that in mind, Celtic have got 9 players that have been nominated for a Ballon d'Or.
Not while they were playing for Celtic?
Yes, while they were playing for Celtic.
Oh, that makes it much more difficult.
And Rangers have 4. One of which I'm going to cut you some slack right now and say you'll never get. One of the players you'll never get, right? But Rangers have got 4 and Aberdeen have got 2, and I'm going to shake your hand and at the Christmas party give you something as an additional present. Much the same as John has for us today, Hugh. I'm going to give you an additional present if you get me one of the Aberdeen players because it's so tough.
Is that right?
Yes. So, with that in mind, 9 Celtic players.
Larson,
Okay.
McGrain, Johnston, Murdoch.
Okay, stop there. You want to offer
Celtic, Rangers and Aberdeen.
Celtic?
Dalglish. Do you say Lennox?
No.
Johnston.
I'll allow you to agree with certain ones that you've got. Moravchik, you've got one more, John, to have a go at. Of the players that have played down through the years.
Nicholas.
Okay, there's 4.
McNeil,
McNeil,
McGrain,
McGrain,
McStay,
and one more, Ali.
one more.
Racking your brains for somebody of...
I can't believe it's not a subject that's ever... The fact that none of us know, like the fact that none of us have written a feature about people who have been...
Brilliant.
That's a good point, eh?
Davy Hay?
Okay, here's the 6 from... the 9, sorry, from the Celtic. So, Larson,
I actually
Nakamura,
thought about Pat Bonner
Pat
too.
Bonner,
Aye.
Paul McStay, Jimmy Johnson 3 times, and Tommy Gemmell twice.
Aye.
So that's not a bad 9, is it?
Right, 9 nominations across.
9
Not
nominations.
9 different players.
Aye,
Okay,
that's good, right.
so that's not a bad 9.
I don't even remember Larson being nominated. Well, like we must have.
There's a wee brief funny story about Tommy Gemmell being nominated 3 times. When I interviewed Tommy, basically he was literally, God bless him, was on his deathbed, but he was still darting away. And I said to him, he was talking about Steen, and he said, of course, he said, I wanted away for Celtic for 1967. I fell out with Steen. Steen says, right, you're on the transfer list. He says, now, we used to go into him every 2 weeks and say, has anybody bid for me, boss? No, nobody not. He says, and for that 3 years, World Soccer voted me best left back in the world.
Absolutely. That sums up. I mean, if I can throw in, it's a brilliant story, isn't it? I always remember, and I'm gobsmacked by, what it's like with memorabilia, John. I absolutely love it. Because I was friendly with Tommy. He used to get into a bar, and I was lucky enough to host his tribute dinner. And I said to him, I can't believe, look at the medals you've won. You've got them in that beautiful case. I said, why did you sell your medals? And he went, well, my kids can't eat medals. And I thought, what a telling line that is. And he just said to me, Peter, they'll never take away the memories. And it kind of summed it up, people's view on medals, strips.
Can you imagine now? Can you imagine what a player like Tommy Gemmell now would be worth? And you get to a point where you're selling
Scored in 2 European Cup finals.
Yes, absolutely. Outrageous. And people talk about, the people have changed the game, attacking fullbacks. I mean, give me peace, honestly. You think the football only started after 1992 in the advent of the Premier League, Hugh? It's just outrageous.
Look where both Craig and Gemmell are for the 2 Celtic goals at Lisbon. The positioning of them. They're like outside. They're a winger.
Yeah, the 4 Rangers players. Now, I have to tell you, boys, you've got your knowledge, but if you pull out one of the 4, then I am absolutely going to be in awe of your knowledge. That's not me being derogatory towards you. It's a toughie.
Here's my one for pulling it out.
Right.
Givars.
Stefan Givars.
He was a French World Cup winner.
This is a French World Cup winner.
Yeah, no, I'm not having that, Hugh.
My left field one will be Oleg Salenko.
Oleg Salenko, the 5 goal scorer in the World Cup.
Who then was a flop at Rangers, but I think on the basis of that he might be nominated.
Yeah, it's good.
Basil Bowley.
Listen, you 3, have you been on the drink before you came in? Any chance we get some logic to this? Right.
I would imagine there'd be quite strong Dutch contingent in the Rangers ones, like Human.
Just out of curiosity, remember there's a great history. And some great players that have played down through the years.
John Greg's
one of them. John and Greg,
McCoist
Ali
was the
McCoist
one,
is one of them.
Laudrup.
The other.
Gascoigne.
So you've got your 3. Forget Gascoigne, there's one out of left field.
Give us an era. Give us an era.
Give us an era.
I'll give you an era. It's the Walter Smith era. You're allowed
First spell, second spell.
First spell. You're allowed one guess. Right, so think long and hard about it before. You've got 1 minute because we're still to get to the Aberdeen.
Out of left field. Terry Hurlock.
Terry Hurlock.
Parini.
Sergio Parini. Terry Hurlock.
You said left field.
Yeah. John, you could save the day here.
Gattuso.
Gattuso would not be a bad shout, but the actual 4th player is Alexei Mikhailichenko.
Right country.
See when you said Oleg, I was like, oh, has he got it? Has he just pronounced it wrong? That would have been brilliant, by the way. You could have walked out of here with that condescending look towards your compadres, but no. Aberdeen.
I know, actually, I was, when you were on that
Russian
vein, I was
theme.
kind of thinking,
Because that was the time of Kuznetsov
I
as
know.
well. No.
Should have got that.
Aberdeen, will we get these?
You'll get one of them.
Strachan.
Strachan's the obvious.
Right away. So it's the one out of left field that you've got to try and come on. And they've had a great history as well of good players.
Hans Heelhuis.
Hans Heelhuis.
Ooh, please.
Alex McLeish.
I was thinking Heelhuis as well, but I'll go...
Hans Heelhuis is a good shout, John. He's a good player.
Snelders.
Oh my God almighty.
Well,
Theo Snelders. Hugh, honestly, a box of fudge coming your... Not that box of fudge that John's given me, but honestly, that is fantastic, isn't it? Theo Snelders is the one that I was looking for. So, absolutely magnificent. I love testing you guys on that. I do hope you've enjoyed the show. I do hope you actually got the correct answers. And of course, the programme, the Journos, continues. Lots of opportunities, hopefully, to see John again in the seat. Of course, we like to debate the burning issues of the moment, and you can offer your opinion on it as well, not only in the comments section below, but on the app if you download it, across our website and our social media. Quite a lot of our clips are going out there. Alison's on the women's football show regularly every week. I've got straight talk with guests from not only the football world, entertainment, politics on the horizon. We should have a few tasty ones for you coming up. And let's not forget the football show with Neil Lennon and Lee McCulloch, as ever, offering their opinion. So there's lots of variety on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button. From Hugh, John, Alison and myself, Peter Martin, thanks for listening. And thanks for watching.